Hello, well this week we're going to finally finish our study of these lovely three beautiful purple iris. And what I wanted to do is I wanted to make this tutorial a little bit more about composition and the options that you have when you're laying something out. Sometimes when I'm in the garden, I pick a flower and I just want to paint it there and then. So I sort of rush into my studio and I place it somewhere on the paper that just feels right. And in this instance, I was sort of almost doing the same thing. I was sort of choosing the flower rather, placing it in an area that opened up options for doing for a composition. So what I mean by that is I pick the flower and I place it on the paper in such a position that I know I can add to the composition. So rather than placing it right in the middle of the paper, I've actually put it low down and to the side, sort of planning in my head that I was going to put a nice sort of crest of flourish, if you like, of flowers going up the page. But of course, if you have the time and the luxury to have the flowers photographed and drawn up, you can actually think about the composition a little bit more. So what I tend to do, and I'll just show you how I work in the studio, when I have time and I'm being steady and careful, I have a pad which is called a layout pad, which is let me just show you that very quickly. So it's called layout paper, and it's a very transparent paper. We used to use it a lot when we were doing fashion drawing at college. It's a very thin, cheap, light paper that you can draw on and not worry too much about wasting paper. And it's great actually for just sketching up ideas. And it is slightly transparent, so you can actually put images underneath like that. It's not as clear as tracing paper, obviously, but it can give you silhouettes to work from, which is quite nice. So you can do that, or you can do tracings. So we often do the tracing anyway from a photograph if we need to, and hang on to the tracings, because it's quite nice if you wanted to repeat your composition or try it again, then you've got the opportunity to rethink the composition. You don't have to lay it out like me. Sometimes it's quite nice when you've got three objects. Three is always a good number. Odd numbers are always nice for making compositions. Basically, it gives you a sort of triangular option. It gives you small, medium, large option, and it also gives you just prettier spaces in between. Rather than having two flowers where you have limited spaces in between, you add a third object and you get really nice negative spaces. So what you can do is you can look at laying them out slightly differently. You could put the larger of the flowers at the bottom and then go up in size till the lightest one, the finest one, is at the top. And then you can decide whether you want to overlap them or not, or you want to tilt them slightly. Obviously, tilting them is quite a natural way of looking at iris, because when they're in the garden, they're often sort of leaning to one side or the other, finding their space in the clump. So that's something that you can put in, but obviously don't bend the stem too much, because they're not a very bendy stem. And usually the flag iris are usually quite tall and very upright, so they tend to not bend unless they've been put in a very peculiar position or been blown by the wind, and sometimes they fall over and then curl upwards to see the light. So, but that's in a situation of stress. Normally, if they're growing nicely, they'll grow upright and lovely and tall. So that was my reason for having it at the top, but it doesn't have to be at the top for your composition. You don't need to include the bud. You could remove the bud and have it as just the three flowers. You could also move it around now and just sort of have a look, see what would be nice maybe as a cluster. So you could have them clustered together a little bit more. Obviously, when you're doing this, it's quite nice to sort of look at maybe spreading it out to get some interesting negative spaces. So you might want to look at the spaces between the petal and the stem. You might not want to overlap them at all. You might want to give them an individual window so that each of them is a lovely portrait on its own. So this is something that I do quite often when I'm trying to work out a nice new composition or something that will excite me and I want to paint it and finish it. That's the main thing, finishing your painting. Of course, you don't have to do all three. We've done them as separate tutorials, so you can just choose one and maybe add the leaves that I'm going to show you in just a moment. One of the traditional things in botanical illustration is that you would have a tall flower like this, you would have the flower fairly high up on your paper. Usually you don't tend to have really big sheets of paper. It depends. If you're painting a painting for a florigeum, then maybe you would be given a specific size of paper that they want them all on. And if the plant is taller than the paper allows, then what they would do is, what's traditionally done is you would have the stem and the lower part of the plant in one area, you'd have the flower in another plant, and maybe you'd have the bud or the some cross sections or some interesting thing there. But you would cut the stem, so you'd have your stem cut such a way so that you would show it cut on the stem that it's been taken from. So you get an idea that if you added that to that, that's how tall the flower would be. We'll maybe cover that on another time when we actually do a botanical study like that. So what I'm going to do now is look at the leaves with you. So this is the leaf from the Iris sibirica, and these two leaves are from the hybrid sibirica, I think. I don't know the name of that one just off the top of my head. And then the flag iris, usually at the bottom of the flag iris, you have quite a compact collection of leaves that come out quite flat. They're sort of solid and flat, and they come out from the side of the stem but also overlapping it, and they're often quite a sort of greeny grey, and this is one from the lower part of the flower, and they're quite blade-like, and they have this very unique, lovely sort of turn off at the end. So as they go further up, they get a little bit longer and a little bit lighter, but they tend to be this sort of grey-green. So I picked those leaves just really so that I could have a leaf from each flower represented on the page, but I'm not doing a botanical study as such. We're going to turn it into a painting. So one of the things that I'm going to do is sort of bend some of these leaves to get a little bit of the foreshortening of the edge of the fold of the leaf, and also to get a little bit of light and play across the page as well. So what I tend to do with those is I lay my my leaves onto a piece of paper like so. I'm just going to move that slightly to one side. And then I'd have a piece of tracing paper over my painting. I'm going to use a bit of masking tape just to hold the tracing paper in place. And if you haven't got low tack masking tape, then what you can do, actually you can do it on the back of your hand. You can just stick the tape on your hand a few times, reduces its stickiness, and then just place it very lightly on the corner. It's just to very lightly hold it onto the paper. So you can do that on a couple of places. Let me just get another little piece and pop that over there. You want it so that you can lift your tracing paper up and down and just sort of have it so that it's a little bit mobile. And then what I do is I just lay my leaves just gently over the top and just sort of think about my composition. And I look at the leaves and think, well, what if I just twisted that to one side? That would be quite nice. So you get a nice little bit of light on the top of the leaf. You get a nice little turn on it. And I like the idea of it coming up and creating more of an arc with the layout of the flowers. So once I've decided that I'm going to do that, then what I do is I sort of manipulate the leaf a little bit to get it a little bit bendier. And then I use a little bit of blue tack. And I just place it on the paper, roughly where I want to hold the leaf. And then I just stick it down very gently, just twist it over the top like that. And then I close one eye and just give a quick little draw around it. Oop, stay still. So this is as though the leaf was sort of caught, if you like. it'll be different from your angle that you're looking at it, because you're looking at it from above, but I'll just do a quick sketch of how I'm seeing it, and then I can describe the process a bit better. So what I've done is I've just drawn around it from my angle where I'm seeing it, and I've got a lovely line through here, and I'm just going to draw this just on the tracing paper, not on the paper itself, and I'm just going to draw over like that just to get that lovely bend in the leaf, and then it disappears like that, comes through the other side from about here. Ooh. I'm just going to hold it again just to double check it. Yeah, so this is where my lovely sort of very unique curve of this leaf comes round like that and curves back on itself. So it's quite nice. I'll get rid of that. Quite nice to draw it as though it was transparent, and then you know you've got the angles right. And then this, we'd get rid of that. Just get my little pencil eraser and just remove this line. When I'm sketching, it's quite interesting. I sort of do things automatically, and then obviously when I'm teaching and showing you, I need to explain it. When I don't want a line, so say I've drawn a long line up here, and I don't want that in the final drawing, I just put a little line through it like that, so I know to remove that line before I trace off the whole painting. So that's what those little lines are all about. I'm removing that. So what you can do, just for the sake of comfort, is remove them now. And then we know we don't want those. It's quite interesting just to hold and look above a leaf and bend it around and see what you can do to get that lovely movement through there. It's quite hard sometimes to decide on positions of leaves and keep them in position and move them around so that they look natural. So there's a little bit of playing around that you can do, a little bit of just experimenting really, just to see what looks nice. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw a few of these leaves up and just sort of place them to sort of create a nice sort of bed of green at the bottom. And I'll just show you how I'm drawing those. We'll just put that to music, but it'll give you an idea of the process that I use to sort of create a little bit of movement and design into my studies. We're going to use some other illustration tools as well, which I'm going to show you as we go further on. But for the start, I'm just going to play around with the leaves and see what leaves suit. Now you could, if you wanted to, make it more descriptive. You could say, right, this belongs to this leaf, so you would write, flag iris leaf or whatever. You can make it into a study page where it's actually quite informative. Or you could just play with the leaves like I am and just enjoy putting the shapes together and creating a lovely sort of swoosh of green. So you can see how my mind's working there. I've got a little bit of practice sort of playing with putting the leaves this way, that way, twisting them around, rubbing them out, putting them back in again. So what I've got here is I've got the biggest leaf here, that big fat silvery one. That's sitting like that on top. So I'm going to put that one on top there. That's my disappearing edge, which is quite nice, and get a nice light on there. But I don't want this great big fat blade right in the centre of the leaves. So I'm going to overlay that leaf with one of the sort of more bluer, darker leaves, and that's going to be this one here, which is a sort of middling sized leaf. And that's going to disappear behind here. So I'm going to rub out where, or erase rather, where it's going behind the petal. So I can do that. And I know it's finishing there. I'm going to have two of the finer, brighter leaves, but I'm going to have them behind. So I'm going to put this leaf behind these two. I'm going to bring that one in front. And this one's going to come all the way down. So we've got a nice leaf that goes all the way through in front. And then this leaf at the back, we're going to have that right at the back. So I'm going to put this leaf that's down the bottom in front. You can change it around. It doesn't matter really who goes in front of who. But when you see the flowers in the garden, very often the leaves are all interlocking and weaving over one another if you've got a few varieties in the flower bed. So deciding who goes in front and who goes behind is quite important. I'm going to draw the edge of that petal so I know just about where that leaf will sit behind there. Like so. And then down here where this one comes in front, we maybe show that one just peeping behind. It's nice to have a little bit of shapes and little windows in between things down the bottom so it's not all solid at the base. So now I'm going to bring this one down, maybe just bring that alongside that rather than overlapping it. And this one is nice because it's got a really steep curve and turning round, so we can have this one at the background and this one in front. So it's just a good idea to decide who's going in front of who. I'm just going to remove the leaf where it goes in front of the flower, just so I know that peeks out from there and it's quite a nice position there. And that one's going slightly up, like so. So all of these little things that I'm talking about, that's all going on in my head, it's just, you know, I'm saying it out loud. So I'm thinking that goes in front of that, that goes in front of that. So I'm thinking about the position of the leaves, but I'm also thinking how it will look at the end with a little bit of light in there as well. We don't want a sort of solid block. Now, I may end up adding other leaves on this side, but at the moment I'm thinking I want everything sort of flourishing this way. And it might be that once I've painted these leaves in, I might want to add another one sort of that takes us further up into the painting. But you do also have to think about, well, what's natural for the flowers? The flowers are usually above the leaves, so maybe to have a leaf up here would be irrelevant. There's also the opportunity, if you wanted to add more buds, maybe some distant, maybe paler flowers in the background. You know, you can build and build and build until you feel happy with your arrangement. So now I'm happy with where my leaves are going to go. What I'm going to do is I'm going to trace it off, or draw it up a little bit smarter, and then we'll trace it off onto our painting, and then we'll start mixing the leaves and looking at the lovely greens and how different they are depending on the plant. One last thing before we go on to the leaves is the stems. So I did pick out the stems as well. So we'll take some pictures of these stems so you've got a nice reference of the colours. So this is the colour for this stem here, so I can make that a little bit greener. So I went a little bit dull on my painting because we were working from photograph. And then this is the stem, what's left of it, for the for the flag iris. So again, I've got that, I'll photograph that so you've got a nice, you only need a little bit in the arrangement that I've chosen, we only need a little bit of it, just where it's peeking out there. So, but it's nice to have that so you can put the lighting on it, and you might want to bring that stem so that it just comes down here. And you see a little bit of it at the bottom. Now I've put my, if you like, my trademark little straight line at the bottom. You don't have to do that, it can all just fade away. But I quite like a sort of ending to things, that's my thing, I quite like it. And we might even do something a little bit snazzier with that at the end of the painting. We'll see how we go. So what I'm going to do is photograph those, but I've got them as live samples so that I can call on them when I need them, when we start painting on the leaves and the stems in just a moment. So I'm going to clear the decks and we'll start mixing the greens. So I've got all my leaves drawn up, and what I'm going to do now is I'm going to mix up the green for one particular leaf, and then we'll adapt it for the next leaf and so on. So the one that I'm going to do, if I put a little bit of tracing paper, put a little piece here, I'm going to lay my leaf over my painting like so. And what I'll do is when I start painting it, I'll just flick it up like that so you can see the shine that you get on the top, and also we can look at the disappearing lines. So I'm going to mix this up, have a little piece of paper ready to match your colours, and I'm going to start with French ultramarine. Let's get a really big puddle of this because we're going to do several leaves, so we might as well have a nice big quantity of paint. Normally I would use my cup of green, but I haven't mixed it up, so let's mix it up from the beginning. So start with a nice big puddle of the French ultramarine. Then we're going to mix with that the Sennelier yellow. And I want to make this quite a blue green, so I'm going to add some phthalocyanine blue. A little bit more generous than normal. And I'm going to add lots of lemon. Nice big puddle. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a little bit of earth into it because it's quite a sort of dull blue green. So I'm going to put a little bit of Sennelier red into it. Now we might be way off, but I'm just going to try that out. It's not too bad, is it? It's sort of there. I quite like that. And actually 2 layers of that with some nice veining, I think that's pretty good. So we're going to take a little bit of that to one side and make it slightly bluer. As the leaf bends away, you'll get a slightly lighter, more bluer green. So I want that for the disappearing edge. So I'm going to take that to one side. I'm going to add some cobalt blue. Other blues are available. I just like that one. So once that's watered down, that'll be really lovely for the disappearing leaf edge. That's not a very nice piece of paper to try it out on, but you get the idea, quite nice and light. So we'll get rid of that, and we'll do this one first. It's right in the middle, and it will give us a really nice guide as to how dark and light the other leaves need to be. So I'm going to paint this with a size 6, and we're going to start, as we normally do, with a lovely glaze. So something like this with the lovely smooth lines, really lovely to practice. I mean, I do love painting leaves, but my favourite leaf to paint is a blade leaf like this, just because you just get to do a lovely watery sweep and with green as well. I love green. So lots of things to love. A nice big glaze through the middle. And I'm just going to lift out a little bit of water. Just to get it nicely covered and nice and even. And I'm going to start at the top of the leaf with that lovely light green blue. So I'm going to pick it up but make it just a little bit paler. And if I just, before I start, if I just get a little bit of blue tack, I'm going to make it like a little blue tack sandwich. So I'm going to just bend that and stick that there, and then I can hold that with one hand while I'm painting with the other. We'll see how that goes. So I'm going to start with that blue light. Just want you to get a feeling of what I'm seeing, if you like. I'm bending it a little bit too much. It's a softer curve really, but I want that lovely blue-green at the top. Just bring that down in sort of sweeps like that, so you get an idea of that colour in there as well. And then I'm picking up the main green, and I'm going to run that in long sweeps. What I want to do is get the nature of the leaf, these sort of ridges of green, but leaving little trails of light. Keep your brush right on its tiptoe and just run it along like so. And don't worry that it's gone a little bit fluffy, that's okay. We're sort of letting the watercolour do a little bit of the work for us. What I'm going to do is run the brush along that edge, get a really nice edge to my leaf. Doesn't matter which way you go, top to bottom, bottom to top, whichever feels more comfortable. And keep picking up the colour, but just on the tiptoe of your brush, so you get a nice delivery of a fine line through the lights. So I'm going to assess that now. What I'm going to do is I'm going to clean my brush and just wipe now, just to get the angles right. So I'm just going to hold that a little bit more like that, just so I can see how the light twists over. So I'm running a clean damp brush now through and keeping everything very parallel so that I get this idea of the veining disappearing over this edge. Run through. I'm just going to bring a little bit of that colour down here. Get it neatly to your finishing line. Pick up a little bit more of the colour now. Everything's starting to settle and you've got a little moment now where you can start to put on some slightly stronger colours. So I'm just going to do a nice little sweep like that to get a few of these nice ridges. Nothing too definite at the moment, just to get the idea of the colour as it changes. That's quite a good start, so I'm going to leave it there, let that completely dry. I've got my rich green going to a light blue green for the disappearing edge, and we'll go back to the rich green for the underneath, but we need to let that dry and relax. Relax, you know what I mean. We need to let it dry and let the paper relax. Just going to catch that edge there, just a little bit fluffy there with the tip of my brush. So we'll leave that one to dry, and we'll just take some of this colour to one side now and mix it up for one of the smaller leaves. So we're going to go for a much fresher green now. We want to go for this lovely, it's almost like a pea green really. Let me just flatten that out so we've got it there. We can just have that. Let's bring it down and mix up from the puddle, from our main puddle, let's take some of that green over here and add some lemon to it. And we're going to just try that colour out just with a nice addition of lemon. I think that's quite nice. We just put a little bit of white paper underneath that so we can see it. We can see why this paper was thrown away, all the size is gone. I think probably the lemon is going to disappear a little bit, so I'm going to add a bit more lemon, just make it a little bit brighter. That's better. Okay, so we'll get rid of that piece of paper because it's useless. And now what we'll do is we'll do this lower leaf. So I'm just going to stick it onto the paper here. So this is the one we're going to do down here, this lovely sort of curved one down here. And that's going to sit in front, so that's quite nice. We can just relax on that, do the top and then do the bottom. It's quite difficult when you get to the edge of your page, especially if you're working on a block, to have this ridge. So it does get a little bit, you have to get a bit contorted really to sort of get down there. And sometimes when you've had a block on the go for a while, sometimes the paper can come loose a little bit on a corner, and that's what's happened here. So we'll get a little bit of cockling, but usually what I do is I get it flattened over time, just underneath some heavy weights, or I re-stretch it, so or stretch it for fresh. You know, I think I'm rambling now, but you know what I mean. I'll stretch it from behind, as it were. Right, so let's do this beautiful little skinny leaf, and it might just be a little bit uncomfortable because I'm right on the edge of the page. But what I'm going to do is just drop the water along this edge here. I might just downsize, so I'm going to downsize to a number 2 brush because it's quite a small area. I'm going to pick up that green now, and I'm going to just put this green neatly at the bottom. So I've got that junction sorted. And just add some water to that. Just bring up a little bit more water. It's quite difficult when you've got a straight line to match at that particular angle. So I'm just making sure I've painted that in, and now I'm just going to drag up some more water. Doesn't matter if it's a little bit green, so long as it's not really dark where you want it to be light. Now, interestingly enough, the light catches this about here, and then it goes dark again as it goes over the top. So we'll mimic that, and we'll put the green stronger at the bottom. Again, I'm just putting it on in little long sweeps to go with how the leaf is growing. Nice long sweeps like that. And then I'll go to the top, go a little bit darker at the top, where it bends over. And then sweep down, going a little bit lighter as I run out of paint. And then just with water, we'll just unite the two so we have a little lighter area in the middle. I really want this leaf to look flat, so I don't want to make it look like a stem or anything like that. I want it to look flat. So I'm going to wait until it's settled a little bit, and then use some of my darker green, the original green that we mixed up, and just run a little bit of that through the middle. Just a little hint of darkness through there. There is some veining to go on there, but I just want a little bit of dark green just off centre there. And then I'm going to use my little bit of dark green that's on my brush, make the light green a little darker with that. And with my brush right on its tiptoe, I'm going to run and make a really nice edge along this side of the blade. Really tricky to do that right on the edge of the block because your hand wants to slip off the edge, so you have to be really controlled. That's not a bad start for that leaf, and what we'll do is we'll let that settle, and then we'll map in the other small leaf at the back with the same colour. I'm going to let it dry before I do that, so I'm going to do this leaf coming through here, which is another skinny light green leaf, and then we'll just put that to music. So when you're doing small areas, you'd only have to worry about doing like this little area here. You could just paint that on its own, that little area there. Making sure you go nice and sharp up to the adjacent leaves and stems, and then you can do each little section without panicking. So I'm going to leave a little bit of light on that one just to catch the light on that corner. But this section I can do all in one go, and this section I can do in one go, and then this section in one go. So break it down into nice little chunks. And I'll come back to you when we do this one here, because it's quite tricky doing a corner like that. So I'll just map this one in now, and then we'll come back to you for this one, and then we'll start adding some detail. So what I'm doing here, going around the corner, is keeping my hand really, really close to the edge. I'm holding on to the edge of the block. I know this is a bit funny sort of telling you how I manage the edge, but I'm using my little finger there to sort of give myself a little bit of steadiness. And I'm holding the brush right down at the end. Can you see how low I'm holding it? So right on the end of the ferrule, just to give me a little bit more stability as I'm going around that corner. It's so easy to slip. There's no guarantee I won't, but you know, you've got to have a little system, I think. So I'm just bringing the colour with me in tiny little strokes, not doing any big flourishes or trying to speed up. I'm just bringing, almost like leading a dog, just pulling that green down the page and encouraging it into a nice neat edge and then going forward a little bit. And if you feel like the paper's drying out ahead of you, you can always just stop and add a little bit of water just ahead of you like that, and then carry on, pick up your colour and continue bringing the colour down. And that way I can stay a little bit more controlled on a very tricky corner. So I'm just going to bring this down to the tip and then come a little bit short of the tip, because the tip has actually got a little bit of yellow on it, so I don't want to miss that out. Just going to sweep that back and just come a little bit short of the edge there. So I've kept it a fairly even tone around there, although there will be shade, but what I've got is two really nice greens that are different from one another, but similar. So obviously from the same mother mix, as we'll call that from now on. We're going to, rather than go into the detail, like I said, I think it'd be really nice to get the other green on and get those taller leaves on. So I've decided that these are going to be the fresher, younger ones that belong to the Siberica, and these are the ones that belong to this hybrid Siberica. So I'm going to bring that deeper green over. It's quite a beautiful green, and I used to have a school uniform that was that colour, and I think it was a kind of sort of wool tweed skirt that I wore, really heavy, and this was the winter uniform. And I remember we had to wear woolly tights in the winter with this itchy woolen skirt. And I remember we would sit for so long that my legs were itching like mad. I hated that school uniform. Anyway, that's what it reminds me of, so we'll try and reinvent it as a nice green for me. So I've got my main green here. We'll just wake that up with the mixing brush. So this was our minty green, and there is a mintiness to this green, but it's a bit more robust. There's a bit more colour into it. So I'm going to add some more Sennelier yellow and some more phthalocyanine. I'm going to make it a little bit richer. And we'll just try this colour out. I'm feeling it might be a bit too bright, but we'll just try it. It's not bad, but it needs a little bit of earth into it, so we'll add a little bit more of that red. Just a tiny touch of Sennelier red. Too much and you'll end up making your green brown. So go steady with the red. I think that's a better colour. So if we had a couple of layers of that, I think that's really nice. So all I've done really is add more of the hot colours, so more of the phthalocyanine, more of that sort of warm yellow and the bright yellow, and then just added that little bit of red just to tone it down. So that's it's a nice way of learning about manipulating greens, I think, of having several greens on the palette and seeing what you need to add to make them vary. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go to a size 4 brush. So slightly wider leaf. I'm going to start with the top one. And again, make sure that everything's dry. This is nice and dry down here. And break it into nice little bite-sized chunks. So we've got this little area in here that we can glaze. We'll just try the colour out. If it looks good, we'll carry on. So when you're coming up to your flower, make sure that you're really sharp about where the water goes. You don't want to your green onto your purple, otherwise you'll make a little brown overlap edge, which won't look nice. Pick up your green, and we're going to just drop that in nice long sweeps. Slightly frustrating that you have to break it up, but that's what makes the pattern quite nice. So swings and roundabouts, as they say. Good things, bad things. So what I do is I get this nice and even, and then I'm going to lift out a little bit of light, just because this is nearest to the big space to the left of the painting. and it would, if it was being lit from that edge, it would be catching a little bit of light. Get it nice and even, and I'm just going to wipe and just lift a little bit of light on that side. Again, I don't want it to look like a stem, so I'm going to add a tiny little bit. Once it's dry, I'll be adding a tiny little bit more darkness on this edge, and also adding some of the veining, which hopefully will flatten it out. While it's settling, take your brush onto its tiptoe and just give yourself a really nice, sharp, clean edge. Now, it's really important that you don't stagger your leaf edge, so make sure that when you draw it through the flowers and then remove the drawing over the flower if you like, because it's really got to continue through and read as something sitting behind. So I'm going to continue up to the top. I'm going to have a little bit of yellow, just Sinelia yellow, which I'm going to put right at the tip of this leaf, but I'm going to do it in these little pieces here, so it should be fairly easy to do. And I'll do exactly the same here, a little bit longer there and lifting out a little bit more light, but we'll just get those mapped in and then we'll start adding the detail. So I've got the leaves mapped in, apart from the underneath of the wide leaf. Let's put in that colour, but also the stem colour, which is quite nice. So let's go for that nice juicy stem. I'm going to lay that just next door there to get a little bit of light on it. So I'm going to use that same colour because it's very similar to this green on one side, and then I'll use the lemon mix. I'll just take a little bit more over here for the lemon mix for the brighter side. So we've just got a little window to make a little bit of a statement of the stem. So clean water. We'll just do a little bit like that. Wipe away the excess. We've got this little junction to sort out, but we'll do that in just a moment. And I'm going to pick up the lemon green and I'm going to have that just on this edge here. Then I'm going to jump the highlight, pick up the darker green and drop that on this side. I'm just going to let that colour feed across for a minute, because what I'm going to do is use the lemon green just to make a nice little junction up into that base. And then this is settled nicely, so I'm going to take a clean brush right the way through that light. And it's sort of softening the colours either side. So clean, damp brush, run it through, just to maintain that nice bright light. It'll give it more of a cylindrical feel. And then when that's dry, we can dry brush on some extra little lines of light to make it look a little bit more ridged. There's some very gentle little ridges along this stem, which would be nice to put in. So towards the top there, I'm going to go a little bit of the lemon again and just create a little bit more colour at the top. One more white to maintain the highlight, and we'll leave that to rest. So I'm going to drop this in down here, but what I'm going to do before I do that is just have a little look at how the colour changes underneath this leaf. So we've got quite a dark bluey green. I don't know if the camera can pick that up, but you get this nice bluey green, and we've also got a sort of shadow created by the width of the leaf. So I'm going to use the dark green that we've got on the palette, and I'm going to add a little bit of phthalocyanin blue into it just to make it slightly bluer again. And then we'll glaze that and get that dropped in. So if you make a wobble, try not to panic. I did one little wobble earlier on, and you want to just use very clean water and just wet the area that you've gone over the edge with, and then just lift it away as quickly as you can with some kitchen towel, and do that a couple of times till you get rid of your spillage, and then come back to it once it's dry. I've got a nice glaze on there, make sure it's nice and sharp there. So I'm going to put my darker green just under here. Just get your brush right into those little corners there. And then I'm just going to water it down as it comes out from the shadow, just make it a little bit lighter. Again, taking care not to go over the edge and making sure that you've got a nice, clean, sharp edge to the leaf. I'm just using a clean brush now just to wipe it towards the end, like so. You've got a little moment just to tidy the edges. If you want to make that light a little bit more dramatic, you could have a bit of kitchen towel and you could very gently lift away and get the pattern of the kitchen towel as well. But then what you do is you just wipe through just to get rid of any patterns. Good job there aren't little baby ducks on there, otherwise we'd have a little baby duck transferred onto there. But that just helps you lift the light a little bit quicker if you want to. So I'll just finish off these little bits of stem, and then we're just working on the lovely fine detail and finishing the bits of stem off as well. So now we're going to start adding some of the detail to our leaves. What I've done is I've given it a really good clean up with the eraser just to get rid of any pencil, and it just gives us a really nice clear idea of how the edges are looking. So I'm going to start from the top to the bottom. So I'm going to start with our darker leaf here, and you can see that there are some really lovely ridges through here, but they sort of come and go in darkness. So they're in a long line, but they sort of dip in and dip out. So they're not very even, if you like, all the way up. They sort of appear and disappear. And then you've got a very soft light. So obviously in the garden, you'd have a little bit more light, maybe a little bit of dappled light on it, some shade. We can add that as we go along. But for the moment, I'm just going to leave it quite flat like that. I've got it drawn so it's slightly on its edge, so everything's going to be slightly foreshortened, so we won't see as much detail as you would do if it was laying flat. We're going to try and curve it. So what I'm going to do is just wake up our dark green, give that a good stir. I'm using a size 2 brush with a nice point, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to rest my hand very gently, and I'm just going to run some very fine veining through here, and what's the word I'm looking for? I'm going to stagger it. So I'm going to put a little bit of a line there. Then I'm going to come a little bit shorter and go up to there. And then down here and sort of stop it a little bit short and then go to the next line so that you get this idea of it sort of coming in and out of focus. But keep the veining very much parallel with the edge of the leaf because that's indicative of the leaf. So I'm going to do that quite steadily and quite evenly through, and then what I'll do is come back and I'll add a little bit more darkness next to one or two of the fine lines. So these are the sort of grooves next to the veins, if you like. They're not the veins. So you're adding a little bit of darkness where you're getting just a little deeper groove, and you're just gently changing it through the length of the leaf. So the difficulty is running through and getting it to continue all the way through. So what I do is I'll run my line till I get to the obstacle, which in this case is the petal of the flower. Then I run over without touching and then touch again on the other side. So it's really important that you get that continuity, and if it means changing the angle of the board, change the angle of the board so that you're not going to get into a pickle. So you run upwards, you jump the flower, and then when you get clear of the flower you continue on. Once I've got a few lines that have continued on in the same angle, I'm then going to go back to sort of putting smaller ones in between that stop and reappear, stop and reappear. That way I'm keeping the same sort of pattern moving along up the length of the leaf. So that's what we're going to do on this one and this one, and then I'll come back and show you how we're sort of going to pull those two together to sort of pull it together to make it look more natural. So keep your brush nicely watered so that you're not watering down the colour too much. Twist it on the palette to a point. Keep your brush as vertical as you dare and rest your hand as comfortably as you can, and try and get it to the perfect angle so that you can, and height, so that you can get a really nice fine line from your brush. It takes a little bit of practice, but practice makes perfect. So just keep going. It will start to come a little bit more natural the more you do it. Okay, let's get these lines on. So I've got all those nice little fine lines moving up and down. Now what I want to do is push the brush just a little bit harder to get some sort of little bands of colour coming up the leaves. So I'm going to stir up the colour again. And we're going to find a little place and then push the brush down like so. And then lift away. So we get a nice little sort of slightly deeper streak of colour, just where we want it. And it doesn't have to exactly be the leaf, obviously, because they're going to be quite difficult to mimic straight off from, you know, a flat leaf lying there. So we're just looking to create what we see, a sort of a version of what we see. So I'm just going to push my brush down and lift away. Push and lift away. And I'm keeping them in line with the lines that I've already made. So I get this idea, get this effect of it being ridged and having like sort of little raised areas and lowered areas. So sometimes it's quite nice to put it next to a very strong vein so you get the idea of it dropping down away from the light. And I'm making them different lengths and putting it at different places along the leaf just to get that lovely sort of random light and dark along the length of it. Going a little bit darker just on the edge here, just to make a nice sort of flat dark area along that edge. And then as it comes up towards the flower, I'm going to put it into shade a little bit. So I'm just going to put a little bit more colour just as it's coming up towards that petal and tucking under. Just continue until you feel like you've got enough lights and darks through. And I'm keeping it a little bit lighter on this middle section just to give it a little bit more of a bend as it comes into the light and away from the flowers. And then as it sort of tips away, I'm adding a little bit more shade onto this side. Keep sitting back. You can see me doing it. I sit back and I look at it and I think, is that catching the light enough? Is it looking strong enough? Now what I'm going to do down here, rather than put more bands of colour on now, I'm just going to put a little tea wash over one half of it. I'm just going to take a little bit of Sennelier yellow and mix it into the green. Just some of the green is quite watered down at the bottom here, so I'm just going to mix a bit of yellow into it. And I'm just going to put this side of the leaf and into a little bit of a shade, but keep it quite warm. And the reason I'm doing this is because it sits very close to the blue leaf that we've got underneath, and that'll emphasize the light of that, but it'll also make the leaf look slightly bent, which it is, just slightly curling over. So a nice little tea wash of a sort of slightly warmer green just on this half of the leaf might just help create just that change in plane. And I might just take the same colour again and just put this first third into a little bit of shade as well, just there. I call that my push and pull, where I'm sort of pushing something into the shadow or pulling something out of the shadow. So it's a little bit trickier to do when the leaf is broken into parts, but what you can do is you can have if you've got leaves from the garden, you can set it up like this, and you could almost lay things over one another. And if you just lay the leaves over one another there, I've got the light coming from my left hand side, so you can see the shadow that it's creating on the lower leaf. So think about things that are casting a shadow. You can see how the leaf, as you pull the lower leaf away, you get a deeper shadow underneath. Is that showing up? My camera person says yes. So you can start to estimate how deep the shadow should be, depending on how far away you think the leaf is from the subject. So something like this, you may not want it in shadow very much. We might just want a shadow that just sits just a little way across the leaf like that, so it's just catching a little bit of it. But here it might be a slightly deeper shadow, so it's coming across and maybe giving a bit of a diagonal shadow across it. So you can put these little sort of depth shadows, as I call them, over the leaf, which will give it a place in the space. So something like this, where the petal is quite high and quite forward, maybe the shadow would be displaced, and we could put the shadow down here. So all I'm doing is just using the watered down green and just dropping the shadow down like so. So you get the idea that the leaf is further away from that leaf, sorry, that the petal is further away from that leaf and creating that dropped shadow. Put it on very gently so you're not disturbing all of the nice work that you've done, but it's quite nice to put those shadows on before you start putting on the extra bit of long shadows along the length of the leaf. There's a lot of ways of saying shadow there, but basically that's what I want to do on that one. Get those little cast drop shadows on there. Wait for them to dry and then put the longer shadows along the length of the leaf. And then just sit back and have a little look. Sometimes you want the leaf at the back to be quite strong and dark, and other times you want it to just disappear. And then I think on this occasion we want the colours to match as closely. So as a little bit of a sort of toying around with different ideas of how you want it to be. Notice here as well, when I put that shadow on, you sometimes get a little bit of an edge. That's why it's good to put the shadows on first, because what it's done is it's just given a little bit of an edge to the glaze. And so when I put my lines over the top, that will hide that little edge to that shadow. Okay, so I think those have settled enough, so I'm just going to drop in a few more shadows. We might even take the shadow, well, we'll have to take the shadow over the lighter green, but we'll do that when we do that leaf in a minute. But we can start looking at drop shadows, maybe underneath here, get a little shadow at there, and maybe even go a little bit darker at the end of the leaves. So I'll just play around with that and then I'll come back to you. So I've exaggerated the light a little bit where the leaf comes into the light here. So the light's not really bright here, but I can imagine that it would get lighter than that in the daylight. So I quite like that little patch of light right at the top there. I've gone over the detail in the dropped shadows. I probably could go a little bit stronger, but I can do that with dry brush later on. So what I want to do now is return to the brighter green, and you can see these have faded quite a lot. So that lemon always lets me down. It always fades much quicker than you imagine. So we want to mix that colour up really, really strong, and we're going to put that as a glaze over the top. So we'll do some fine lining, but I'm going to mix a glaze shadow to go over the top. So I'm just going to use a load of lemon and just have a tiny bit of the green into it. So what's left of my puddle of green. And then I'm going to use that darker green, what's left of it on the edges, to put the veining on. Now the veining's a little bit more pronounced on these. They've got longer, sharper shadows through the middle and then softer veining either side. So I'm going to, it's not quite in the middle, it's just quite a little bit off center. So I'm going to put that long line in. I'm going to jump the stems. So I put the stems a little bit, you know, backwards and forwards, so they're coming in front of here and behind there. But I'm just going to take this dark line just below the center. That'll be my main midrib pleat, if you like. And I'm going to continue that up. Imagine it going through there, and now it's going to start twisting off and heading towards the other side. So where that leaf twists away, so does the midrib. Now the midrib continues back into view on the other side, and this time it'll be a little bit nearer the other side. So we can jump behind there, a little bit there, and then it's going to come centre because the leaf isn't twisted away from me, the leaf is just slightly foreshortened, so the midrib's going to stay through the middle a little bit, and then underneath there. And then if I twist my leaf, yeah, the midrib is going to come slightly higher than the midrib. So the middle of the leaf, just a little bit towards the top. So I'm going to give that a chance to dry, that little fine line through there. And while that's drying, I'm going to mix up a little bit of the bright green on my brush and give a nice edge to this leaf. This leaf has got quite a nice crisp edge. So I'm going to use the brighter green just to sort out any little misses along the edge of the leaf, but also just give it a really crisp, flat edge. And what this does is sort of tie it up where the two leaves cross over one another. You're establishing this one on top, you're giving it a little bit more importance. And then if there's any wobbles, you can sort those out at this point. So if your leaf has dipped where it shouldn't have, you can just adjust that with that little bit of water. And then I'm going to use my eradicator just to make sure it's really nice. I'm going to eradicate behind it so that I just soften the painted edge and soften it, get it as sharp as I can into the leaf. So I'm sort of reducing the size of that line, even though it's very thin, I'm softening it into the leaf shape. So I'm going to do that either side for this leaf just to give it really good crisp, a really good crisp presence. And then I'll do exactly the same on this one, running through my midrib and then sharpening the edges. So I'm going to add some more veins to these green leaves because obviously when we put our green wash over, we're going to need it to be quite strong and these veins need to show through. So I'm going to mix up a little bit of the darker green, and even though I've used that for the midrib, I'm going to add a little bit of green, a little bit of yellow, maybe just a little bit of lemon to that, so it's not as dark as the midrib, but they do need to be fairly dark so that they shine through the glaze. And we'll do the same as we did before, but maybe a bit more continuity with these, so maybe take them all the way up. Rather than doing them in little short bursts, we'll do them as nice long veins. This one seems to have this more sort of structured look to it. So as I say, a little bit darker than the wash that we're going to put on, but not as dark as the midrib. And then we'll put these long veins either side of the midrib. Just to get a nice little bit of structure going. So I'm going to do that all the way up. Just remember when you get to the disappearing edge that your lines come up, and then just lift your brush away so you don't take the lines right over that twist, because you want that light to really shine out. So if you take the lines all the way over like the midrib, it'll just flatten it a little bit, so just shorten them, but do take them from underneath so you get a little bit more structure from underneath, because that's in shadow and you do want those to shine out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to finish this one with all of the little veins, put the veins onto this one, then I'll come back to you for the tea wash. So now that I've done those little lines, what I want to do is I sort of lift a little bit of light. I'm sort of feeling like I want a little bit of light through the middle of this area here. There's a little window, and I think it'd be quite nice if some light was coming through there. So I'm just lifting a little bit of paint off there, not a lot, just a little, and another little bit of lifting here as well, just where there's a window through the leaves. You can choose a big area or a small area, it doesn't really matter, so long as it makes sense to the composition. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my lovely tea wash over the top now, and I'm going to try and get it to the same tone and shade as this beautiful leaf. So let's mix up that lovely colour that we made earlier. Let's hope there's enough. I might just mix a little more. And you want it so that it's going to make a difference. You don't want to make it too weak. So when I say tea wash, make it a little bit more like a coffee wash, which is a little bit stronger, or a stewed tea wash. And so what we're going to do now is just put a little glaze of this on the main part, just see how it looks. When you're putting it on, put it on in the same way, nice long strokes. And if you want to leave a little bit of light, just lift away with the tea wash. Don't take it all the way to the end. So you might want a little bit of light there where it's just wrapping behind. And then I'm going to put the tea wash on this bit, which is underneath, sort of cast shadow if you like. And then where the leaf turns and is in shadow, we're going to go really intense to drop a lot of that nice rich green under there, because usually when it curves away from the light, you get this intensity of colour, which is quite nice. Then I'm going to continue that down to where it sort of gets foreshortened. And you can see the little veins are shining through and the midrib's shining through a little bit stronger, which is just what we want. I'm going to go nice and sharp and dark on that twist. And then as we come through here, where I've lifted that little bit of light, I'm going to take the colour towards that light. And then just with a bit of water, just blend that away and then pick up the colour, jump the light and continue down the leaf with some stronger colour. So we're getting this little light and shade all the way around to create some nice interest in our composition. Now what you want to do is you want to see how that dries. Compare it to your real leaf if you're lucky enough to have one, and if it looks pretty good, then live with it. If it looks like it could do with another glaze, I might get away with one more glaze, and then wait till that's dried and then reglaze. But do it in the same way, so you're still jumping the lights and lifting your brush away when you get to little twists of highlight. So I'm going to do the same thing to this leaf and jump a few little lights and try and get that looking nice and intense. And then hopefully by the time I've done that, this one will be dry and I can just put another little layer on that. And that will give us our lovely contrast between the sort of mid-green leaves, the bright green leaves, and then our last job is to put on the ridges on our beautiful minty leaf. So I'm going to let that dry because I've got a little corner there that's giving me trouble, so I want to let that dry. And what we'll do while that's drying is we'll come back to our big silver leaf. So this is the one where we want to get these really beautiful strong ridges coming through. Now you could put these little nibble lines into it and little holes. I haven't left any holes to make them, so I'm not going to put them in. But I might just, because it's a little bit pale there, I might just put that little one in, that little sort of mark there. So if I do that now, so I don't forget, I'm going to use a little bit of quinacridone gold. I'm just going to mix that into the Sennelier yellow that I had at the bottom. And I'm just going to mark up roughly where I want that little nibble line. I'm imagining some bugs chomped its way along the seam there. So I'm just going to draw it out like that. And then put in a little bit of yellowiness where I need it. Soften that a little bit, and then I can work around that, and hopefully that will stand out. So our first job is to mix up a little bit more colour. So I'm just going to go with the French ultramarine, a little bit of phthalocyanine blue, lots of Sennelier yellow, and mix that fairly dark so we get a nice deep sort of grey-green to run these lovely dark ridges along. You might want to have a couple of brushes on the go, and what I want to do is I want to run my first ridge along just with a fine line. So just working freestyle if you like. Remember that it stays an even distance away because it's then curling over and disappearing into the light. So I'll make it a little bit lighter there. I'll just sweep it back with my fingertip. And then I'm going to put a stronger, thicker line underneath that one. Just to get the shadow, the depth of the shadow next to it. So I'm just pushing, this is number 2 brush, just pushing it down a little bit harder, just to get a slightly wider line. And again, when I get to the top, lifting it and just water it away. So now what I want to do is get another little fine line next to that to get the next little ridge along. Make sure that it all disappears behind the flat line, or disappears to nothing if that's what you're doing. I want to get a little line right next to that, just to show that there's a little gap and another little shadow. Going as light as I dare, and then lift away. So I'm just going to add a little bit more yellow to that, just to make it a little bit warmer to go the other side. And I'm going to put another little crease alongside that. And this one I'm going to slightly wobble, because they're not perfect. So I'm just going to give that a little bit more character. I'm getting to that nice little nibble line now, so I'm just going to go alongside that and then continue that little wiggle and then lift away. A little bit more lemon in it, going a little bit greener each time I come forwards. I'm just going a little bit thicker now, pushing my brush down to make a slightly wider crease. And that's going to sit below that little imperfection. And then lift away. If you push the brush down too hard and get a darker area, just wet it and dab where it's gone a bit dark, just so it matches in and it's the same lightness all the way along. So I'm going to come back now with a darker colour, and just on the inside of this dip I'm going to go a little bit darker. So I've gone back to the first one and I'm just going slightly darker just to get that to really dip in and look like a little groove. And do the same with this lower, wider one as well. Just on one side of it, the side nearest the light. If you have a bit of a wobble, do shorter lines. So if you have a tendency to wobble with your brush, just go a couple of a centimetre maybe at the most, and then have a little rest, and then come back a little bit, and then lift away. It's all about doing it in your own comfort, if you like. So don't feel like you have to go all the way to the end in one perfect line. It rarely happens. So what I'm going to do now is just continue with my nice fine lines, giving them a little wobble every now and then just to make them look a little bit more natural, and just take that all the way to the edge. What we do now is work back from that and change the greens, so go a little bit lighter on some and a little bit darker on others, so you get this nice undulation and change of colour across the leaf. So on some of the lines I'll go as pale as this and just put like a few sort of wider lines that just taper away, just to get a sort of fresher band in the middle of the leaf, because it's not even all the way through, so it's quite nice to have a little area where it's slightly different, just to make it look more natural. It's about testing your skills of observation, but also your decision making as well, what you put in and what you leave out. Remember, it's not a photocopy that we're doing, it's a painting, it's an interpretation. We're trying to get it as accurate as possible without being too slavish to a photograph. And actually we're working from life today, although you'll be working from photographs, you'll get an idea, I think, more this way of looking at the photograph and then looking at what I'm doing, of some kind of balance between the two. Off we go. Just mixed up a little bit of Sennelier yellow into my existing green, and I'm going to use that as my shade colour. So I've put some veins on the underneath of this leaf, but I've kept them very regular and very even, because on the underneath they become much flatter. If I just show you, you can see that less of the ridges and more of a flat surface. So when it's curled under like that, it's all in shadow. So what I want to do is I want to put this shadow right the way across, but I'm just going to leave the end peeping out, so we get the idea that there's some light just catching on the end there, just to give it a little bit more drama. It's not very dramatic, but you know, a little bit more drama. And then I'm going to repeat that, put another wash over it, just to make sure it goes nice and dark. And I've also raised the edge a little bit. Just because I drew everything freehand, sometimes you realise you just want to go a little bit wider where the leaf is turning over. I'd gone a little bit skinny. So I'm bringing that 2 consecutive washes, and what that's doing as well is softening those veins, so it's really making that very, very gentle under there. And if you wanted to, you could soften the ends of these as well. You could just put a little bit of water over them because they don't need to be really loud. And you could put a little bit of kitchen towel over the end just to lift off a bit of that detail. I'll come back and sharpen up the edge and what have you, but it's just nice to have that little bit of softening. I did make a little mistake as I was going over with the wash in that I just overlapped onto the top petal, the top of the leaf there. So I just want to wipe that back and just use a bit of kitchen towel to dry that off. So if you do a mistake like that, or you wobble a little bit, put it right with the eradicator if you have one. I'm just going to give that whole area a little bit of a wiggle. Wait for it to completely dry before you come back, because otherwise it will just bleed into the area. And then when it's completely dry, you can come back and put on a nice sharp new edge to replace the one that you'd lost. So I think we've just got the stem to do. We're just going to put another little wash down the stem just to perk that up. And I'm going to use a little bit of phthalocyanin blue. Just mix it onto my very green palette here, add a little bit of lemon. And now what we want to do is we want to just add in a nice little bit of bright green. That's probably a little bit too blue. A little bit more lemon. Nice little bit of bright green down this side just to freshen up the stem. This is a bit of artistic license, so I'm not looking at the photograph anymore. I'm thinking about what will make the painting pop and hold together without going too far off our accuracy, obviously. And I'm just giving that as like a little tea wash over the darker side now, just to make that much fresher along that stem. And then all I do is just soften next to the highlight. So I'll take that all the way down, and then when I come back up, I'm going to be putting on a few little ridges, just with a soft green. We're just going to put a few little fine lines, very, very lightly up the stem. Even lighter than the lines on the veins on your leaves, because it just wants to be a little idea that there are these little ridges of colour that go up the stem, and it wants to be very, very subtle. So I'm just using the last hair on my number 2 brush and just dragging it on very, very lightly, just to give the stem a little bit more rigidity. Just the last little ones just through there, just through the light, so you just pick up a little bit of that veining through this stem at the top. The same will go with the other little stems. I'm going to sharpen them up. I've already added a little bit more drop shadow onto them, but I'm just putting a little bit of a sharper edge onto them, perhaps a little stronger shadow on one side. You can also just build up a little bit more on the shadows as well, and you can sharpen up any areas where they meet the leaf behind. So I had a little bit of an overlap on this side, so I'm just going to make it a little bit sharper there. And maybe just a little bit fresher along the edge of the stem. And using whatever little bits of green you think will match. I'm just going to go a little bit darker on those drop shadows either side, just to maintain a little bit of light through the shadow. And the dry brushing that I was talking about will be a little bit of that light green, sort of very gently applied where the shadow is. So don't make it too wet. You're just putting on an extra little bit of colour just where the drop shadow is, and that will help sort of make it stand out a little bit more without losing all of your detail. I'll finish the stem to a little bit of music, and then I'll say cheerio on this project. I hope you really like the arrangement. Don't feel like you have to do it this way. You can play around with your tracing paper, you can draw up your own leaves, just have fun with it and think about how you're going to make this lovely arrangement sort of inspire you, and use the techniques that I've used on these iris to inspire you to paint an iris from your garden. There are so many varieties that are similar in colour, similar in pattern, but just slightly different. And that way, when you finish that painting, you can turn it into whatever you like. You can sell it, you can display it, whatever you want to do, it'll be your own. So use my techniques, but use your own flowers, if you can get hold of them, to create your own masterpieces.